Hey, what is up guys? Eric Thane here from Cinema Mastery, and today we're going to be talking about color grading. Now, this video actually that you're about to watch comes from my Pro Editor course. And in the Pro Editor course, we talk about color grading in depth and everything you need to know about color grading, but it's not just color grading, it's everything you need to know about editing and the post-production stack in general. So we talk about editing, we talk about sound design, we talk about color grading, we even talk about your workspace, getting your workspace set up correctly and making sure that you have the most efficient workspace for getting the best edit. So if you're interested in learning editing and you like this video and want to learn more about this, definitely hit the link down below to check out the Pro Editor course. Inside, you get tons of videos teaching you everything that you need to know about the post-production process, how to make your edits look amazing and cinematic. And you also get tons of assets and music tracks and LUTs and other assets that we have available for you that you can use in your own edits to make them really pop. So if you like this video, take a look at the link down below for the full Pro Editor course, and I'll see you on the inside. All right, so we made it to the color grading section. In this section, we're going to be teaching you how to color grade your films. Now, color grading is basically the process you go through of tweaking the color, making changes to brightness, contrast, saturation, changing colors, just adjusting the color of your films to make it look more interesting and more appealing, to bring your colors into harmony and make them work really well together. This is kind of the final process that you go through in order to make your films look polished and to make them more interesting and more cinematic. So before we jump into actually how to color grade and use the tools and everything, it's important to understand and take a look at color theory. Now, understanding color theory is important because color theory will kind of dictate what you do and why certain things look good, why certain colors go well together and others don't. And so going into this is going to help you to understand why you're using certain colors and how you can use the color of your film to tell your story better. Now, when it comes down to it, color grading is not just about throwing a filter on your video that makes it look cool or cinematic. It's really about storytelling. It's really about using color to help push the narrative of the piece that you're creating and better tell that story. So let's jump into it. So the first most basic concept to understand in color theory is the color wheel. Now, the color wheel is a model that is used to understand color and how different colors interact with each other. This was a model that was invented a long time ago, but still used today in art and film and any kind of, design or whatever, anything that uses color. And so on the color wheel, at its most basic, you have your primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, of course. Red, yellow, and blue, the primary colors, are the three colors that can't be created by mixing other colors together. So you can't mix two other colors to create red. Red just simply exists. Secondary colors are the colors that are created when you mix primary colors. So if you take red and blue and put them together, you get magenta or violet. If you put red and yellow together, you get orange. And if you put yellow and blue together, you get green. So purple, green, and orange are all secondary colors. And then tertiary colors are the colors that are created when you mix secondary colors. So for example, if you take blue and green and mix them together, you'll end up with teal, which is a tertiary color. Now, all of this is fine and dandy, but it doesn't really mean anything unless we understand where color comes from. So let's answer the question of what is color? Well, in terms of color grading, a color is essentially just a combination of three different values on the color wheel. Those values are hue, saturation, and intensity. As you adjust those values on the color wheel, you'll end up with different colors. So hue is the actual color that you're working with. So as you move around the color wheel, you change the hue. Hue is like green, blue, orange, yellow, purple. Those are hues. Saturation is kind of the intensity of the color, if you will. Saturation is a measure of how much gray is in the color. So if you turn the saturation all the way down on a color, you'll end up with gray. If you turn the saturation all the way up, you'll end up with a color that is really rich and vibrant. And intensity is the lightness or darkness of the color. Now, each of these three values are independent of each other, so when you increase the intensity of a color, you're not actually changing the saturation or the hue, and vice versa. So if you look at the color wheels in your color grading software, when you select a color and you're changing that color or modifying that color, as you move around the color wheel, you'll be changing the hue of the color. As you move out towards the edge of the color wheel, you are increasing the amount of saturation in the color, and then the intensity is usually controlled by a slider that is next to or below the color wheel. So when we get into color grading, we're going to be using these different values of color in order to select different colors in our scene and then modify them to make them look the way that we want. Next, let's get into color harmony. Color harmony is basically the concept that different colors work well together and other colors maybe don't work as well together. And different colors, when they are combined with other colors, can create different moods or feelings depending on what you use. Now, there's kind of a spectrum of color harmony, and it basically ranges from what I'll call boring to chaos. So on one end of the spectrum, in color harmony, you'll have just a red square. It's only red, there's no other color there. It's going to be basically in perfect harmony, but it's also going to be kind of boring. So adding some variation in that red is what's going to make it a little bit more interesting. So for example, if you add another color to your red square like green, then you'd end up with two complementary colors that are really harmonious with each other and work really well, and they also create a certain vibe or emotion. Now, if you start adding too many colors or emphasizing too many colors in your film when you're color grading, it'll start to descend into what kind of feels more like chaos. So you want to make sure that you are keeping your color grading simple and only working with or emphasizing only a handful of colors, or even down to maybe even just one color in your films, to keep it more harmonious and simple. Otherwise, if things start to get too crazy, it can start to feel chaotic. So when it comes to combining colors in your color grading, let's talk about 3 of the most popular color combinations or color schemes that you'll work with. The first one is analogous. Analogous basically means you're using colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So if you have a scene that is blue and teal, that would be an analogous color scheme. For example, if you look at a movie like Blade Runner, you'll notice that some of the scenes are very orange and it's only different tones and shades of the color orange. This is a monochromatic or analogous color scheme. Or for example, The Matrix, when things start to turn green, you'll notice that there's a combination of green and then greenish pink kind of skin tones, which are also right next to each other on the color wheel, which makes this an analogous color scheme as well. The second most popular color scheme is complementary. And complementary are colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. So the most popular example of this is in major blockbusters like Transformers, where they use lots of teal and orange. The teal is right across the color wheel from orange, and so you get a complementary color scheme. Another example is from the movie Amélie, which is a really good example of complementary colors, but different than teal and orange because it used a primarily red and green color palette, which are also across the color wheel from each other and complementary colors. And third is split complementary, which is kind of a combination between analogous and complementary. Split complementary gives you 2 colors that are analogous or right next to each other on the color wheel, and then you use another color that's across the color wheel from those 2 colors. So for example, in this scene, you can see that the dominant colors are red, green, and teal. The green and teal are analogous and right next to each other on the color wheel, and red is on the opposite end of the color wheel, making it complementary, which makes this color scheme a split complementary scheme. So now that you know about the color wheel and different color combinations or color schemes, well, how does this apply to color grading? Well, when you're working on a clip, you can choose one of these color schemes in order to adjust the way that you create your color. So for example, on this clip, I could go one of many different ways with it. So if I wanted to take this clip and turn it into an analogous color scheme, I could adjust the colors so they're pushing towards one side of the color wheel. So we already have some nice warm tones on the beach here, in the sand and the dirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the blue in the mountains and the water and push them a little bit more towards green, which pushes them towards that yellow color, and then also push the green in the trees towards a more warm color. As I kind of make these adjustments and turn down the saturation of some of the blues and other colors that would normally be across the color wheel from the warm, it ends up creating an analogous color scheme. Now on the flip side, if I wanted to take this same clip and do a complementary color scheme, well then in that case I would try to accent the blues in the water and also accent the orange and warmer tones in the ground, because those are complementary colors. So I'm going to push the blue in the mountains a little bit towards teal so we get a nice teal effect, and then I'm going to push the warmer colors a little bit more towards orange and saturate them a little bit in order to create that color contrast between those 2 complementary colors. Now, if I desaturate the trees in the background, which are green, then we end up with two dominant colors in this clip, which are the teal and orange, which makes it complementary. If I wanted to turn this into a split complementary color scheme, all I would have to do is increase the saturation of the trees, which adds green as a more dominant color, which turns it into split complementary. The reason is because the trees are now green and the mountains and the water are now teal, which are analogous colors, and then the ground and the skin tones are more warm orangish colors, which are causing the complementary to the two analogous colors, making it a split complementary scheme. Now, it's important to keep in mind that creating the right color scheme in your video is not entirely your job as a colorist. Most of that actually happens when you're shooting. And it's important to remember that color grading starts in front of the camera. It starts when you make decisions like locations and set design and wardrobe choices and props that you use. By putting colors in your scene that complement the wardrobe or complement the location that you're working in, you're already starting to develop a color palette. And that's really the job of the director and the DP or whoever is shooting the film. When it comes to color grading, there's really only so much you can do to push colors a little bit or adjust them. You really can't do any wild adjustments without causing all sorts of artifacts or other things happening in your image. So if you're somebody who's shooting your own videos and color grading them, it's something to really keep in mind while you're shooting is how are you going to color this film in post, and be paying attention to that as you're setting up your shot. So there you go. There's a quick primer on basic color theory. Again, it's important to understand this because these things are going to guide your decisions throughout the rest of this process, so you know what to do, why you're doing it, and how to create colors that are visually appealing and will make your images look beautiful. In the next few videos, we're going to go into the actual color grading workflow and how to use the tools so that you can take this theory and put it into practice.